America won. Okay, we're not going to brag about our win, but Africa was a strong contender for the papacy in the last election. That's something that 100 years ago would have been, frankly, quite impossible.
Hey there, I'm Nick de la Torre, the host of Morning Joy, a daily radio program from the Guadalupe Radio Network. We have a great team of regular contributors to the show, including Cy Kellett from Catholic Answers. Please enjoy this segment called I Spy with Cy.
If you really want to think about the center of the Catholic world today, you might think of some place like Uganda. Today, if you want to see where the church is alive and joyful and growing faster than anywhere else, you got to look to Africa. And I myself have never been to Africa. I hope to get to go sometime. Maybe we can do a Guadalupe Radio tour of Africa sometime together, Nick. I'd love it if we could do that. But according to the Vatican's latest statistics, the global Catholic population, about 1.4 billion people now, and Africa is posting the strongest growth, I should say, of any continent. Roughly 1/5 of all Catholics live in Africa now, and that number keeps rising every year. And it's not just numbers on paper. Africa is the only region where the number of major seminarians actually increased, up nearly 400 in the last year from the previous year, while every other continent saw a decline. Even in Asia, they saw a decline in vocations to the priesthood. It's worth remembering that Christianity first touched Africa almost at the very beginning. Christ himself, as a baby, of course, visited Africa, and he chose to minister in the very place where Asia, Africa, and Europe meet. In the Acts of the Apostles, Philip the deacon meets an Ethiopian official on the road from Jerusalem to Gaza, and he explains the scriptures to him. He baptizes him, and the man goes on his way rejoicing. That scene is meant to put in our mind, make clear to us that Ethiopia was one of the first regions outside of the Roman world to embrace the gospel. For centuries afterwards, Christianity flourished in North Africa. In places like Alexandria, Carthage, and of course Hippo, the church gave us saints like Augustine, Athanasius, Cyprian, and many others. But beginning in the 7th century, Muslim conquests swept across North Africa and the Middle East, cutting sub-Saharan Africa off for many, many centuries from Christian Europe. Nearly 1,000 years of that. Trade routes that once carried goods and could have carried missionaries were replaced by Islamic caliphates, and travel to the Mediterranean world, or from the Mediterranean world by Christians into the interior of Africa, really became impossible. Where Europe and even some parts of Asia remained open to evangelization, Africa was cut off. So while Christian Europe developed monasteries, universities, and missionary networks, the gospel couldn't reach below the Sahara Desert. It wasn't until the age of exploration and later the missionary movements of the 19th and 20th centuries that large-scale Catholic evangelization took root across sub-Saharan Africa. Finally, the gospel had returned home in a way. The real flowering came when African clergy and bishops began leading the work themselves, especially after the Second Vatican Council. This encouraged local languages, local music, and cultural forms of worship. Part of the vibrancy in Africa today comes from demographics. Just think about this. The median age of a person in Europe today is 43 years old. The median age of a person in the United States is 38 years old. The median age of a person in Africa is 19 years old. That means that the church there is full of young families and children. While many Western parishes wonder where the young people are, in Africa, they're already there serving and discerning vocations. That's why we have this boom of priests from sub-Saharan Africa. And those young people are being formed not only in parishes, but in fast-growing networks of Catholic universities. Africa now has more than, think about this, 250 Catholic higher education institutions, including great universities like the Catholic University of Eastern Africa in Nairobi and Veritas University in Abuja. Many were founded in the last 30 years to train teachers, nurses, economists, and clergy. They combine rigorous academics with Catholic social teaching, and they're producing a whole generation, probably generations of lay Catholic professionals who see faith and public service as inseparable. I'm going to be frank with you. These universities are doing the work that many American Catholic universities kind of let slip. They're providing a fully Catholic education that does not just give degrees, but forms hearts and minds for Christ. And the church's social footprint in Africa is huge, 7,000 hospitals and clinics across the continent. In many rural regions, Catholic schools and missions are the only place offering education to girls. That's in fact why some Catholics are facing violence in Africa. Just think about in Nigeria, for example, where Catholics and other Christians face persistent attacks from Islamist extremists like Boko Haram. Mass kidnappings, burned churches, and murdered priests are tragically common in Nigeria. Yet, the parishes remain full. The Nigerian bishops regularly call for government action and urge Catholics to respond with courage, forgiveness, and steadfast faith. And that's exactly what Catholics are doing. And not just in Nigeria, in Mozambique, Burkina Faso, the Democratic Republic of Congo. They're having to fight. They're having, just to be able to go to Mass, but they're staying strong. And that means we've got a church in Africa that knows the cost of discipleship. Did you know that there's 29 African cardinals today? Several of them seem to be strong candidates in the last papal election. America won. Okay, we're not going to brag about our win, but Africa was a strong contender for the papacy in the last election. That's something that 100 years ago would have been, frankly, quite impossible. It's a distinctive, vibrant church that's growing there. So next time you hear someone say the church is dying, maybe it's just moving from that Ethiopian that was baptized by Philip to today's cathedrals in Nigeria, Kenya, and Uganda. The gospel has come full circle. And if we want to glimpse the church 20 years from now, we should probably step into a Mass in Lagos or Nairobi. Young voices, bright vestments, and the faith of a continent that refuses to lose heart. That's where the heart of Catholicism is beating today. I don't know, Nick. What do you think?
Wow, that is pretty wild. The statistics that you've shared with us are absolutely incredible. I mean, even just looking at the median age in Africa, combined with like what you were saying about over 250 Catholic universities and the number of lay Catholic professionals that is outputting. Because when you think about here in the U.S., we have, Franciscan University. We have a bunch of these places that are good, but you can almost count like the good Catholic universities on one hand. And those are the people that are populating so many Catholic parishes and Catholic organizations. And, right. And so I'm just absolutely moved by this. What do you think is the secret ingredient? Because over here in the West, it's like for decades now, we've been so hyper focused on like, we need just the right program. We need what is this secret sauce that is going on in Africa that we have not tapped into here in the West?
Well, I do think we are starting to tap into it, Nick. And so I wouldn't want to say completely have not, because I believe at the root of all of this, as we seem to end up talking about every week, is the Holy Spirit. I mean, the Spirit is moving, but also, the Catholic Church came to Africa in a certain sense to serve, like the Irish missionaries that went down to serve in Africa for generations. But and that's kind of put the roots down. But now it's going the other way. The cycle is coming the other way. And now the priests you probably have African priests that where you are, almost everywhere you go. Not too long ago, I met an African priest in North Dakota. I was like, dude, you are a committed missionary. If you come from Africa, that's a temperature shift for that dude. So we're seeing that it go the other way, and that you just can't argue with demographics. Young is young, and Africans are still having children. They have not, and there is a thing where, as people become wealthier, they have fewer children. As people move out of rural areas into cities, they have fewer children. Well, both of those things are happening in Africa. But the drop off in population growth, the drop off in the size of families is not as impressive in Africa, as terrifying really as in Africa as it is in places like India or China. So Africa, I think, Christianity got a hold of many African societies before the secular kind of destruction came through and just wiped out those societies as secular kind of ideology does in many places.
That's really profound. And you're right. I do know some Catholic priests because they come to my parish and they ask for support for their diocese or their parish. And so they spend a number of months with us here in our town. And I've gotten to know a little bit about some of the struggles that they face, and they are real struggles. In fact, the priest that I most recently met, his sister and another relative were violently murdered shortly after his time here. And so, you're making me think about where the church spreads is where the church is suffering. And I think about how here in the West, things are so easy and so comfortable. And we maybe forget about how we need God. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, it's the dilemma we face, isn't it? Christianity, it sets down its roots. What does Christianity do when it comes? It teaches people to read. It builds hospitals, and it helps stabilize families. That's what Christianity does. Well, guess what happens when you teach people to read, improve their health, and stabilize families? People become prosperous. And then when people become prosperous, they start to think, this is the story of the Bible over and over again. I mean, it happened to the Hebrew people every time they would follow God, they would prosper. And then every time they would prosper, they would go, hey, we don't need God. We got God.
Right.
we got this God. So, I mean, that's why we have that story again and again in the Bible, because it is human nature. God blesses us, and then we turn from God because we think, oh, we've got the blessing now. And one's heart sinks to think that will happen in Africa, but it being the human story and Africa being the birthplace of humanity, it will probably play out there just at some point. But it does seem to be being delayed by the strength of the church in Africa. That's kind of a wise church in Africa. They see what happened in Europe. They see what's happening in Latin America, and so they kind of have a little bit of forewarned is forearmed going on in Africa. I think we have very wise church leaders there and laity who are like, no, we don't want that, and so they're staving it off at least for another generation.
Thanks for watching. You can hear Cy and all other contributors with me live on Morning Joy each weekday from 6 to 8 a.m. Central at grnonline.com. And before you go, I just need you to know that Jesus loves you. Peace.